everybody. Welcome back to another wonderful episode of the Silver Lyming. My name is Anne Desjardins. I am the host here. And just a quick bit, I really enjoy putting this podcast out there for those particularly in the Lyme or chronically ill world to have some hope, to hear about some different instances of how people have recovered their health after really long periods of time of sickness. And just to remind you that not everything about illness is bad. There are definitely a lot of negative parts to sickness, but there are some really good parts and some beautiful things that happen because of our experiences with them. And so I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to be healthy again, to bring you this podcast. And today is a really special day for me. I've been excited for this for a couple of weeks now, but I have my beautiful cousin, Saha Limaye, here with me. And I am just, again, I said to her, it's like, this is so fun to do with her, but I wish it wasn't because of the circumstances. And I wish it was something else cool that we like to do together or something different with regard to it being about Lyme disease and tick-borne illness. But she has a very beautiful story and I learn a lot from watching her, and I'm very inspired by her because she is out fearlessly in nature. And if you don't follow her on social media, you really should take the chance and the opportunity to, because she is in, again, some of the most beautiful places on earth, in my opinion. And it's fun to see her evolve and go out there and, again, be fearless, because I have a little bit of PTSD about going out in nature now, unfortunately, because of my experiences with Lyme and tick-borne illness. But she's killing it out there. So again, it's really beautiful to watch you, Saha. I'm happy to have you here. And again, this is probably one of my most special guests maybe ever, because you are my family.
Oh,
so
thanks, Anne. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that you're doing this podcast and putting it out there. I think it's such a great resource for the community and for people who might feel like they're really in the thick of it and don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There definitely is one.
Yeah, thanks. I kind of look at it as like a lot of healing on steroids, almost. Like you can just kind of listen to a lot of good stories about people getting better at one time. It's in concentration form. So hopefully it has a good impact on people's lives and helping them to get back to wellness. So, but if you don't mind, can you please share with us a little bit more about your story with Lyme and tick-borne illness and how it happened to you?
Yeah. The origins for me are still a bit of a mystery. It's my physicians think that there is actually a reasonable chance I was born with it, which is very rare, but it can actually pass from mother to fetus. If the mother is like sick with Lyme, just because there's such a long period of contact there with like blood contact through the umbilical cord. So they think it's possible that I was born with it. I had horrible colic as a baby. And what was interesting for me, and I think a reason that it took so long for me to get a diagnosis, is that a lot of my issues were digestive in nature. And I know that like it's such an interesting thing in that it affects people so differently. And so I think my presentation was part of the reason it took so long for us to figure out what was going on. And also I think, there were certain adaptations that happened throughout my life that allowed me to cope for long periods of time. And it really wasn't until I moved into a moldy house in Nashville and then dealt with mold a few times thereafter that I really got sick and then went through the journey of figuring out what was going on.
Yes. And I remember you had an exposure to a moldy fridge that triggered some stuff for you along the way too.
Yeah.
Set you back a little bit. And for people who are not familiar with this concept, mold can be a terrible trigger or immunosuppressant type of organism that really impedes healing from Lyme and tick-borne illness. Like you could throw everything that you've got at it, but if you're in a moldy environment, it's next to impossible to heal because of the disruption that's causing to your immune system. So just be cautious if you're living in a home or a space that is exposing you to mold. You really need to reconsider things.
Yeah. And I think mold is like such an interesting thing too, if you kind of think about it from like a spiritual perspective, because mold is like this thing that grows in the dark where there's no light and there's kind of like moisture and it grows slowly. And I think that like a lot of times for me, it's been about like kind of like shedding light on the pieces inside of me And I really feel like that has been what this like journey has been about, is like really taking me to a place of looking much deeper inside of myself and like shining a light on things I probably never would have come to had it not been for like literally being taken down to my knees so many times through the journey.
Yeah. And so that's a really good acknowledgement too, and just the correlation between some of the characteristics about the illness to our own personal being and how that connects, and to really do that deeper dive in looking at self and figuring out those connections. I had a prior guest who had talked about ticks being parasitic, obviously, but to look at the behavior in your life that is also parasitic. And I had never had anyone point it out like that before. And it was like, oh, I see. Okay, I can make some better connections about that and learn a little bit more and get some better introspection. So thank you for calling that bit out as well, because I think ultimately for you, for your healing, maybe from looking at from my perspective, you've really done a lot of the shadow work and gone really deep in self to figure out how to help yourself heal. Can you talk a little bit more about the things that you think have helped you heal? Is that really what ultimately did it? Or I also know from watching you do a lot of stuff with nutrition and making different types of foods and jams and spreads and stuff for yourself. Yeah. And it's really fun to see you make these things. But is that what got you to that point through this journey? Or
I think the digestive component was so interesting for me. Like that's really where it started. And so I went on so many diets because I was diagnosed with IBS and then like different bacterial infections and like fungal overgrowth and blah, 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 blah. So I tried like this diet and that diet and then and like, gave up so many foods and did so many different things. And it took many, many years before I got to the way that I eat now, which feels very nourishing for me. But again, like kind of like hearkening back to like the spiritual component of like that digestive thing, it's like my body just would not accept nourishment. It wouldn't accept that kind of like warm motherly goodness from planet Earth. And it just felt like it was just rejecting everything. So I really think like changing my mindset around foods was a big part of the journey. Like really not looking at it as though it's like this black and white thing. Like there's no good foods or bad foods. There's really just things that are compatible for me at this time and things that are not compatible for me at this time. And like really not getting into the dogma of it, because I think we just really have to accept whatever it is that our bodies feel like is aligned. And like learning to not fight that and to just go with the changes as they came up was really helpful for me. And like there was a period of time, actually the last time I went through like mold exposure, I'd been vegan for a while and then dealt with mold, and my body was just not breaking down like any plant foods at all. So it was just like not an option to keep eating the way I was. And I ended up actually going like hardcore carnivore in the other direction. And I went for 6 months with just eating beef, lime, and salt.
Wow.
And like, that was a really tough period for me, especially like mentally coming out of like, like not eating any meats and only eating plants and then just eating beef. But it was like really the reset that my body needed at that time, and listening to that and then going through like food reintroduction and kind of like slowly finding my way to a place that felt more balanced. And I'm still kind of like working on that. I'm still having reactions to foods that feel very healthy, really yummy. Like, why would I have problems with blueberries? I don't know. I mean, I do actually know, but it's like, but like just kind of like navigating things as they come up and like not judging myself for like, oh, now I'm reacting to this thing, and just not being like, it's not off the table forever. I'm just having a moment with it. I'm going to make the adjustments that I need and I'll come back. But I think the big thing amidst all of this has been like just really seeing myself as being resilient, which is not a thing that I really saw when I was really sick. Like I didn't think of myself as resilient. I thought of myself as sick. Like I almost like defined myself by what I was going through. So I think really changing my mindset around like the ability of my body to bounce back, and just like the inner strength that I have, and like proving that to myself, both in the gym, out on trails, just in terms of like making hard life decisions and just sticking with it because I'm worth it. Like that's been a big game changer for me.
You're making me cry a little bit over here. And I see you, and that's why it's like extra meaningful for you to talk about all of that, because I see your resilience and I see you just continuing to go. And I know you've had setbacks and I know you've had some ups and downs in life, and you just keep plowing through. And like I'm just thinking about your name, Saha. And if you could tell listeners what that means, please, because I think that's really fitting right now after knowing what it means in particular about you.
Thanks, Anne. Saha comes from Sanskrit and it means the enduring one. So it's, I guess, speaking to the experiences that I have, or the things that I've endured in life and the ways that those things have changed me, but also the components that have been consistent, like the things that I've actually endured throughout my life. I think like a love of cooking is a thing that is just Saha. It's just who I am. I love to cook, love food. Probably comes from our, Italian roots a little bit. I remember some pretty epic holidays at
Yes.
the family's house. Yeah, with like all the food one could imagine. So there was definitely a lot of inspiration there. But also just like being in nature has always been a thing for me. And then there were things that I sort of like found later, but then they've just stuck with me in a big way. And I think like fitness is really one of those for me. And also like really, and I think that there were roots of this in my childhood, but like sort of more spiritual components, and having that be like a guiding light in my life, just to kind of like keep me on track in the dark moments and really just be that light for me when I need it.
Yes. Yes. And it's hard to sometimes be your own inspiration or find your own light. And so I'm glad that you've been able to have that strength. And again, the endurance and perseverance, and that you just continue to go. And your fitness stuff is really fun to watch too. Like I'm thinking about that. Like if you guys want some really cool workouts to do that don't really require equipment, that's the other thing I like about you, is like you're very simple and efficient with life. Like you have such beautiful creative ways of doing things, but it is usually pretty simple. And like your exercises are really cool because you just do things on the floor or like use the wall or whatever equipment that you got around, books. I forget what kind of things that you're doing, different stuff.
Yeah, I've used books.
Yeah. And it's just like, oh, I've got that behind me. I have no excuses, right? Like you just keep going, and you are like the little Energizer bunny that way with that can do attitude and will do. And that's the other thing, man, I think about. Oh God, I remember watching you hack some wood and like making your own fires and heating your own house that way. I'm like, dang, this girl is legit. And I think it's all part of your healing and connection to nature and connection to spiritual force. And I mean, it doesn't really matter. I don't know if you call it God or universe or what kind of, like energy are you're kind of fluid that way too.
Yeah,
I call it God and universe. Like I kind of go back and forth.
All the above.
Yeah. And so, I think you meditate pretty frequently?
Meditation hasn't been a big part of my journey. I'd say that hiking can be like a great meditation. Just being alone with myself in the woods for 6 hours walking.
Yes.
It's like its own sort of meditation. You're just noticing like the changes in the light and like your cadence, and it gets you really in tune with your body and the way that you're feeling. And that has been more like the type of meditative work that's really resonated with me are the kinds of like embodied meditation and also movement. Like I know you've seen all of my like weird dance stuff. I don't even know what that stuff is. I think it's kind of dance. It's kind of Tai Chi or Qigong, which I've never studied. But those kind of like getting in a harmony or flow with music has also been like a great way to sort of like meditate in a physical movement. But also it's been like this experience of experiencing music, experiencing something an artist is putting out there into the world, and kind of like letting it flow through my body. So sort of like a meditation, but almost like a partnered meditation, because the music is like your partner that you're moving with.
Yeah, that's cool. I can see all of that in that now. And I do watch that sometimes with you, and it's always like, yeah, cool. But I mean, it's really important to move body and connect that way. And I remember reading somewhere like we sort of lost that as society, like singing and dancing and paying our respect to God that way. I guess in church you still sometimes do, but in a daily practice, and more appreciated when we have that energy and we do allow our body to move that way, and we can move through so many different emotions and different things that we have trapped there too. And I feel like that's a lot of what you may do that way. And there is a lot to be said for spending time with self in nature. You don't have to sit in like a Indian leg position, to meditate on a cushion. Like there's so many different ways that people can meditate and connect. It's not even connect. Like it's just even like letting go or just being fully present in the moment. When you're able to do an activity like that, where you can just be fully present and put yourself into where you are and not have to have any time concerns or time constraints, and just letting the body be, letting yourself be. Yes. I think that's a huge thing that a lot of people aren't good at, that I think you are very good at. At least you seem to be, from where I sit looking at you, it's like, you're really good at just being, you're really good at spending time alone and letting yourself just be who you are and ground yourself and being connected to yourself. And there's a great piece about you from that. And that is a good practice. I'd be interested, I do palm reading, and I'd be interested. There's a line here, the line of inner realm is what it's called, but it goes from your usually right underneath your ring finger, and a lot of times it'll stop like right here, but I would be curious if yours goes way down into the sea of subconscious, which is this outer palm quadrant down here.
It does, interestingly, on one hand, but the other one, it takes several diversions, which I think is also very apropos for me. Yeah. My life has taken a few diversions.
Yes. That's again, we were talking about the whole idea of having past lives in the same lifetime. And I think you're a very good example of a lot of past lives that you've come and gone as somebody, and now you've morphed into somebody else. And do you think that has helped you through this to be able to do that?
I actually think Lyme gave me the gift of that. Like I was such a type A person, like before this whole experience, like everything had to be perfect. And then what happens when your body isn't perfect, or it doesn't act in the way that you want it to? And there's like literally no ability to control that. And that was such a big experience for me, in like loss of control and having to really like learn to surrender to this. And also, like, I think there was a really critical point for me at which I realized I really had to accept the possibility that I would be like this forever. Like, and that would be okay. I could still love myself if I didn't, like, if my body didn't behave in the way that I wanted it to. And that was like a really hard pill to swallow, but like also really necessary. And even in like the many years that have passed since me being at my worst, like I've had hiccup moments. And what I've found every time is when I react and I try to fix them, and I'm like, oh, something's going wrong, I've got to like do this big thing to like counteract what's going on right now. That is what makes me worse. And then that like reaction to fixing it is actually the thing that I end up spending a while recovering from. So it's like, if I just am with the moment of like, oh, things are a little out of whack right now, and just let time pass and let it resolve itself, because the body wants to be healthy and it is resilient by nature, I just come back to an equilibrium as long as I don't try to fix things.
That's a really good point. And that, I wonder too, I mean, obviously when you're trying to fix it and reacting that way, it's like a fear-based reaction more so. I think I feel like I see like very constricting to the energy and just like certainly making it worse. So I can appreciate if you're not doing that, not clenching down and just sort of going with it and accepting it and still having faith and confidence and assurance that it is going to be okay and that you're going to be okay. And I also like how you're thinking about it, that you leaned in and really accepted yourself for who you were, even if you were going to stay that way. Yeah. That's not an easy thing to do. It's definitely not an easy thing to do, but I think it is necessary. I had another guest there was talking more about like surrendering with it, right? Like you're kind of just still going with the flow of things. You're not giving up. You're not like falling to the bottom. You're not drowning. You're just kind of giving in and going with it. And when you can go with that flow, it just becomes so much easier to do everything else. And there's not that resistance versus we're like, oh, fight you to the end. And it just makes it much harder on the body and the whole system to react in a positive and beneficial way.
Definitely. And it's also like getting in that symptom mindset too, where you're like, oh no, now this thing's happening. And now I've got to research whatever this thing is. And then you learn like basically like dissertation level information about like whatever weird spots have just shown up, or like the thing that you're now allergic to, or whatever the thing is. And now you've just created so much more like ammunition for the fear that you have within yourself. And like, that is a thing that I don't know at what point I corrected that behavior, but that took me a long time to get out of like going way down the rabbit hole into learning about whatever the thing was that didn't feel right at that moment, and then becoming obsessed with it. And then it just getting worse because of course that was like my entire mindset was based around that thing.
Yes. It's like what they say is that you see what you're looking for, right? Or like you find what you're looking for. And so if you're constantly looking and focusing on that, then you're going to see more of that or get more of that, whatever it is. And it can be, I think, especially when you have been sick for a long time, I don't know. I think it can be hard to not kind of panic in a moment when you're feeling something coming back into your body. And it's like, no, I don't want to go back. Like and like you can try not to overreact, but with great practice or with continued awareness, it is much more comfortable and sensible to have that equilibrium and that balance to yourself and to not give into that overwhelming anxiety and panic. But it's like, it's really hard to not have that after you have been sick for so long. That's another question I'm thinking about. How long exactly did it take for you to get diagnosed?
Oh man. Okay. So the moldy house in Nashville was like 2010. And I don't think I got a diagnosis until like 2017 or 2018. So like 7 or 8 years.
Okay. And then in theory too, if you have been born with it, a lot longer.
We could say more like 28 years.
Yes.
That's quite the Saturn return. That's another story.
Yeah. And I also was thinking about I was walking today, I was like, when we were little, we used to play in like at your parents' house and stuff, like in the grass. And I'm sure there was all kinds of deer running around, all kinds of stuff. So, cause I've often wondered exactly when did I get it too? I don't know. We don't know, but I was like, that'd be wild if you and I got it at the same time, like playing when we were kids. I don't know, just had that thought for whatever reason. And so you've been then, now, would you say that you're fully healed? You still have some blips? You're like 85% of the way there. How are you feeling about your recovery?
I don't really think like Lyme, quote unquote, is still an issue for me. I think in a way my body still has a little bit of like PTSD from the cycles of getting sick. So maybe there's still some things going on with like my nervous system, which is in constant communication with the immune system and, the hormones. And so that things get a little like out of whack when one thing tilts a little bit. Cause I noticed, stress is just a huge, huge factor for me. Just like I moved last week. I was just under a ton of stress, and like the difference in how I felt that week versus like the week before when I had been off of work and was just out hiking in the woods all week, like big difference. So I think like it's more just like regular stressors, or like I'm still pretty sensitive with my digestive system. So just needing to be like mindful with that. And when things get a little bit off kilter, just like going back to what I know is like kind of like the bread and butter that feels right for me. And just slowly walking my way out of whatever the imbalance is. But yeah, at this point, I don't really think that Lyme is an issue. And also, like, I guess I do wonder to some extent, like, what the action of Lyme is, because it does present so differently for different people. And I do also wonder about testing. Like, I did PCR testing. I'm not sure what you did for your diagnosis, but like the more that I've learned about PCR testing, the more that I kind of like question like really what the origin of any of this was, of any of the physical imbalances that I've like experienced, because I'm guessing there's probably a lot of people that have Borrelia in their body that don't have Lyme, right? So it's kind of like, well, how can we say that was really the thing? Like, maybe it was stress. Maybe it was like the initial thing. And then I became totally obsessed with how my body was reacting. And then I just got sicker and sicker and sicker until I stopped obsessing. And then, so it's like, it's kind of hard to say.
Yes. Yes. That's some very interesting thoughts. And like, will you ever really know the answer? Because why is it that some people are affected and some people aren't? And is it just the underlying co-infections? Is it the underlying overall balance? Is it like the spiritual health? Is it? But then I think about kids and I'm like, I don't know, because usually they think kids are in pretty good space yet. Like it's more when we get grownups that kind of imbalance really happens, hopefully.
Yeah.
And like, what is that? And is it ultimately that we just have a lesson that we have to learn? Is that really what the impetus is? Is it not really sickness at all? Is it really just soul's evolution requirement to get us there, that we have to feel whatever we were feeling?
Yeah. I really do wonder that sometimes. And there are a lot of ways in which I'm like very grateful for this journey. I definitely would not be the person that I am today without this experience. And I feel in a way like it's brought me so much more in touch with being human, like what it means to be human, what it means to live in more alignment with my environment. And it put me in a position where I was like willing to make radical changes in my life to heal. And then I just realized I'm actually just willing to make radical changes in my life just to be happy, just because it feels good. Like it doesn't even have to be for healing. And that alone has just like set me off on a totally new path in life. Like I've lived pretty much off grid, more or less entirely for the last, 4 or 5 years. And spend a lot of time in nature. I'm living in a truck camper right now. I'm like going to build my own sort of like land paradise. And I would not have done any of this had it not been for this experience.
Yes. And that's awesome. And that's one really beautiful thing that has come to you out of it. And again, maybe that's why it happened. So you could get here and be comfortable in your own skin and be allowed to just be yourself and accept yourself for who you are and love yourself truly and just enjoy life. Like that is one of the best gifts in the entire world. Like how could that be something you'd ever want to trade your experiences for? It's worth its weight in gold to just be okay to be you. Right. Yeah. I think about how many people are not comfortable in their own skin. You can see it in how they carry their body, how they look. Like sometimes you see people like hunched out, you just see the discomfort in their physical body. Like, I don't even know if they're aware of it. And that's another question that I have for you. If I were somebody that maybe is wanting to learn more about this, I keep hearing you say like, you listen to yourself, or you have come to just be able to feel what's going on in your body. Like, are there ways that you could recommend to somebody who maybe not as open or feeling yet? Like how do you open or become more feeling that way?
That's a really good question. I would say one of the things that was really helpful for me was both studying and working with body talk and body intuitive practitioners. Body intuitive is a modality that I was practicing for a period of time. And it was like an evolution of body talk, which is one of the original sort of like consciousness theory of disease practices, where we're really like considering that, okay, a lot of the things that are manifesting for us physically have begun at the level of consciousness. So we want to examine what's going on at the level of consciousness to resolve what's going on physically. So working with a practitioner, and I would personally recommend like Body Intuitive, because I think Body Intuitive does this amazing job of blending Western medicine along with traditional like Eastern medicine. So you get like a really comprehensive view of what's going on in the body, both as a spiritual body, as a physical body. And they have a lot of practices from using acupressure to doing trauma release techniques that can really help to clear things that are coming up. And I think that that can kind of like get you in touch with what might be going on within the body, and also just really help to shift the thinking patterns where it becomes less obsessed with the physical, and gives you maybe some starting points for starting to do some introspection.
That's, I think, very like helpful. You
Yeah.
kind of give somebody a specific way, and you can look that up, or I'm sure that people could reach out to you if they want more information about that. If they have questions about it. But there are different ways like that you can begin to open yourself, and you can begin to learn to just be comfortable to sit with self.
Totally.
Because that's something that's not even easy for people, or to be able to say that you love yourself, like look in the mirror and be like, hey, it's you. I love you. Like I love doing that by now. I have a good time with that practice, but that's not comfortable for some people. It's not comfortable for a lot of people. And that's heartbreaking, because those people are just prime targets for dis-ease to occur to them. And again, like you have such a good grace and like power and peace that you emit. Like it's just, you're just so solid in yourself. And it's just such a beautiful thing. And I'm so glad that you've gotten that through this experience, because it's it's totally not a lot of fun, and you're younger than me, and to go for that long of your life with whatever symptoms that you have had and the different things that's, it colors things. Sometimes your experiences, it changes things. Like some of the things that you've gone through in your life, maybe you wouldn't have done it that way because you felt better, or, but again, like you wouldn't change it, and I wouldn't change it either, but it's just sucky that it has to happen that way. But I'm glad in the end that you get such good clarity and again, soul evolution, because that is one of the best things that we ultimately could have.
I'd say homeopathy is another thing that I've gravitated towards, and even just understanding like the theories behind homeopathy, and understanding how if you're working with like a traditional homeopath, they'll ask you all of these random questions about like how you feel when you wake up in the morning, and like, do you ever like sneeze 8 times, or like whatever these random things are. But like these remedies that they've come up with are like so specific to like almost like an energy that somebody is embodying. And it's about sort of like remedying that entire energy, like starting at the very root, and then like working its way out to the physical presentation of the thing. So like learning that there have been roots in so many different systems of understanding that disease is functioning on so many different levels. And like that imbalance is really like a domino effect. So what we might be seeing might actually be like even our body's attempt to heal the thing. Like these symptoms that we're seeing might not even be like, these might not even be signs of the problem. These might be signs of the solution. Yes. So like maybe like learning to focus a little bit deeper than what our eyes can see. Using maybe practitioners as a starting point. And then another thing that I'm getting really into right now is kind of like the whole quantum world. There's like quantum nutrition and a lot of other like maybe like new biology understanding. And then also like pro-metabolic diet has been really helpful for me. Understanding like how the metabolism is such a fundamental component of health. Yes. And how keeping our body temps high is really helping like drive all these enzymatic processes that are happening within our bodies, which will help drive detox and conversion of all of the different food components into things that are bioavailable for us. Like without keeping our metabolism going, we're not able to do life as well. So like learning about some of those different components, I think can also be a major support for people. And I think exercise really fits in there. There's so much research too about exercise and how it is really able to rewire the nervous system as well, and then really help the immune system by building more lean muscle mass. So I think, to whatever extent, given where people are at, that they're able to start to exercise. And I think especially doing things that are load bearing, just because of the ability for that to result in lean muscle mass. And all the signaling that does for our bodies, like hormonally and neurologically. I think that is a huge component that's been helpful for me, and is one of the pieces that I've been really fortunate to be able to keep consistent throughout my entire journey, at least to some extent. And I think that really helped me from going all the way under in a way that would have been even more challenging to come back from.
Yes. Because you already have a little bit of natural defense just from being in a physically more alive manner from exercise and such. And you're making me think about Ayurveda, and we talk about your internal fire, your Agni, right? Like, yes, that's your metabolism in a sense. Like you got to keep that burning, and you want to keep it burning bright and healthfully, and putting in the good foods, helping it with things like exercise and stuff will just keep that internal fire pumping good to be able to burn through toxins and poisons and stuff. It's so important. And also, I really love what you had said about symptoms sometimes being a sign of healing and not a sign of sickness. And I had in that instance the visualization of like releasing, and sometimes when we're releasing, like other things bubble up and come out. And that can be, again, like more symptoms, sometimes how they manifest, but it is more because you're healing, you're releasing it, and it has to come out and be felt in the body first before it goes away. So that's some very good, encouraging ways to look at stuff. And that's what I was going to ask you was, what was your kind of encouragement for others? But I feel like you're kind of hitting it in ways that people can help themselves, different things that they can do to help themselves heal. Different things that I know that you've done. And I feel bad in a sense too. I had someone say to me, well, like, I can hardly even breathe. And that's unfortunately a different spectrum of some of the tick-borne illnesses that make it challenging to inhale air, even, the air hunger and just different issues that way, or, being wheelchair bound. But I was just reintroduced to rebounding. I don't know if you do rebounding.
Yeah. I got really into that for a period of time.
Me too. Yeah. And then I forgot about it. And I just found my rebounder again. I was listening to Barbara O'Neill. I don't know if you ever listened to Barbara O'Neill on YouTube. She's an Australian lady that does a lot of great talks on nutrition. And I've really been enjoying her, but she reminded me about it. And so I have my rebounder out. And for people who aren't familiar with that, it's just like a little miniature trampoline. And Barbara O'Neill was talking about just doing a health bounce, you don't even have to hop off, like get distance between your feet and the surface, just to kind of slowly bounce in place and just to move the lymphatic system and get the body moving again, because exercise is huge. It's a great way to, I almost look at us like snow globes, and we need to be shaken up from time to time. Like all that stuff will settle in the body. And if we don't move it ourselves, it's just going to stay dormant in there and resident, and you're never going to get it out. So you have to get that crud moving. And so a rebounder is a pretty simple way for people to exercise if they're not really able to handle more.
And like we talked about, the body responds so much to our thoughts and our ideation. So maybe for people who really can't move, even just somebody's car alarm is going off.
Oh, all good. I thought somebody was honking and saying hi to you. Hey.
Nope. That's second time this car alarm has gone off this afternoon. Maybe even just like visualizing, like you were talking about the Agni. Like, I feel like that's like a palpable thing that I feel now that I didn't feel for many years. But maybe even just visualizing this concept of like having a fire going within the body and like letting that fire move into different parts of the body. Like, if you can't move, turning on the fire just in your mind might make a meaningful shift.
Yes, that's a really good point. I know just from listening to Joe Dispenza and some of those other people who are more into that kind of mental help yourself kind of things, they showed 25% dexterity increasing in people's fingers just from visualizing playing the piano. Like they didn't actually do it. They just were laying there and visualizing, practicing and playing the piano, and their dexterity increased by 25%. So it is possible to do great things with just visualization techniques. And it can sometimes sound hokey to people who are listening and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I've done this practice. Sounds like you've done this practice. Lots of people have tried this. What do you have to lose in trying it and picturing good things happening to your body, healing happening within the body, and seeing the sickness? It's another thing I tell people sometimes is to talk to it. I don't know if you ever like saw your sickness and were like, listen, you and I were in the same body. I get it, but this is my body. We can peacefully coexist together. That's really what's going to have to happen here. And so what do you need from me to make that work so that we can have a better relationship? Because the one we've got right now was not comfortable when I was so sick,
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And I've had other people that have told me that they've done that or that they've actually seen it in their body. And I was like, well, okay, well, I'm the only person who's talking to the sickness in her body. But that seems to help some people as well. And just having a good conversation with it and letting it know who's in charge.
Yeah, that's so amazing. It kind of reminds me of like internal family systems work. Because you start to think about like the different parts, right? And like maybe the illness is like, it's like a part and we need to speak to the part and we need to understand its function and we need to understand what it needs us to hear and then work with it. And yeah.
Yeah, because it's a living organism too. And ultimately, I don't believe it wants to be trapped in a human body. I was reading about that somewhere too. And it was like, it really does not want to be in the human body because it sort of loses its chance to replicate. It's gone off course when it's in us. It's a mistake in a sense. And so it's a little bit panicked and it doesn't really want to be here. And so we talk to it and we acknowledge it, make peace with it that way. Sometimes that can help just, again, have a more symbiotic relationship with it being in an existence with ourselves. That was another question I was going to ask you is, do you think it's possible to kill it ultimately? Or is it more a matter of kind of making peace with it and understanding that it will always maybe reside within self, but self can be in a higher place of control than sickness?
I don't know that I'm the best one to answer that question because, to be honest, I am still in the dark about what it is, at least in terms of the manifestation with me. Yeah. So I don't know that I'm the one to know, but I think that we can really radically change. And our bodies have this incredible ability to regenerate. So I don't think that whatever it is can hold us down forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I wonder if that's, again, what it really comes back to is just that internal struggle of like learning how to manage feelings within self and learning how to find more of the joyous ones and the lighter, happier ones than focusing on the darker ones. Because again, maybe they're all at the same time. And it is what we look for that we get more of. So,
yeah. I think really like capturing the good days was a practice that helped me. Like whenever I would have a good day, to like really just be like, I am canceling everything I have today. I'm just going to be fully in this day. I'm going to be in the joy of this, be in the joy of feeling good. And that like just repatterning to like, I've got this day. I remember I had this day. And anytime you have a bad day, you're like, well, I had that other day. That was good. So I know I can do that again, until you get to the point where you're like, I've actually like fully walked out of this thing at least once, you know? And then anytime you go back into it a little bit, you're like, I know how to do this. I've walked out of the woods before. I can walk out of the woods again. That level of just like building confidence in yourself, I think is really the key, like in the long term, because there are going to be hiccups, right? Like you're going to have a bad day or two there. Rather than like getting in the weeds about the bad day, just remembering that you 100% know how to walk out of this thing again, and you will.
Yes.
Like will get you back to the place that feels good.
Yes. And there's that endurance again. And maybe that's what it is, right? It's just like building confidence in self and understanding that, because I've had that fear, and I'm sure again, other people have, and maybe you have too, of like getting sick again, and it's like, stop with the fear, go back to the love side of it, go back to the light, get out of the fear, and know that you've got such a better toolkit now because you've been there. You already know how to fix it. Like it's not going to be the same. If you go back, you're not going to be there for 7 more years because you're going to know how to fix it a lot sooner. And it's not going to take decades off of your life this time around because you again, have developed a much better understanding, connection with self, ability to hear self, ability to fix self, work with self, that it wouldn't be the same experience.
Yeah. I think for me, it was like 2.5 years were really bad. Right. And then I got out of it. And then I had another phase that was like maybe 1.5 years, and I got out of that. The next phase was maybe like 6 months. I got out of that. And the next one was like 2 or 3, so it's like every time kind of go back in, I get out so much faster, and I've never gone back in like the way that I did the first time. So it's like, healing kind of goes like this. You just cycle upwards, and sometimes it feels like you're going like around a roller coaster, but
yes. I often have that imagery too for people. And it's like, it's not a straight line out. Like there's like a lot of zigzags and turns and down holes and out holes and in holes for a while. And then you come back out. And I mean, ultimately it's just your ability to have resilience and endurance, determination. I think about building, like putting lots of little pebbles. Each little thing that we do puts a little pebble to make a wall that we can climb out of, and sometimes we slip, sometimes we fall, sometimes we're not able. But every little effort that we make towards healing is another little pebble that's going to help us ultimately climb out. And you just have to keep going and not give up and know that in the end, it's going to be okay. This too shall pass. But self-acceptance is huge. And you talked a lot about that. It's like, just learning to accept the self for where you are, even if you were to stay sick for the rest of your life. Like you can't be angry with yourself. That's not going to help you at all to shift things. And you just have to be accepting if that is like to be okay with that, which is hard. And that's another thing that just comes into my head is the suicide rate with Lyme and tick-borne illness is one of the highest suicide rates of any disease. And I don't know if people are aware of that. So it's here I'm sitting and it's like, but then I remember what that darkness was like and what that sickness was like and how hard it was to not give in, and to like keep going. Yeah. Did you have? I was
looking at some old photos the other day when I was preparing for this, and there were all these photos I remember of like times that I would spend inordinate amount of time on my bathroom floor. Cause I was like doing like coffee enemas and like, I can't remember the number of like practices or whatever things I had that I was doing every day to kind of just like keep myself afloat. But I was just spending so much time like alone on the bathroom floor. And there was like some times where I felt pretty hopeless. I felt so dysfunctional. I didn't know if I would come back out of it. And I felt pretty engulfed in it. And also I felt like I'd managed to accumulate a lot of people in my life. And because of the way that I was looking at myself, they all looked at me that way too. So it also became hard in that I had the reinforcement of all of the doctors and practitioners and friends and my former partner and my family and everybody else who kind of looked at me as the sick girl, also holding me in that same bubble with me. And I've seen that with other people, both that I've worked with and that I've been friends with, that they have a lot of people around them that reinforce that identity of sickness. So that's a hard one too. And I think like sometimes it takes having conversations with your family. Sometimes it takes just demonstrating to them that you're getting better. Sometimes it means like actually having to separate yourself from the people that are holding you in that identity, or maybe like moving, or like, you know, whatever you got to do to like really change the patterns.
Yes.
But yeah,
I never really thought about that so much from that perspective, because I've been alone for a while. And so it was easier for me to sort of shield that identity in a sense as I was going through it, and so sick, because people didn't see really what I was doing at the time. I talk about it freely now after the fact, but during the time, that identity was not really inherited by me because people didn't see it. And so that would be something that would be hard to divest from. Like, how do you really separate that again from self and from others having that as your identity once you begin to heal? Or could that be, again, something that might keep you sick? If people are constantly just looking at you as the sick person. That's one thing we talk about with energy work or healing work. A lot of times is to see the person as a whole, as a healed version of themselves, even if they're very sick, out of fairness to them. Look at them as a whole healed human. So I guess then on the counter of that is the detrimental viewpoint of looking at them as a sick human and keeping them there in that space. And that would be hard to get yourself out of that. Would you think?
Yeah. And I felt like I was doing like somewhat of a disservice to my partner at the time. Like, me being sick was then a burden on him, which like was just one more thing that I had to add to the list of like bad things about me and like reasons to not want to continue to exist in the way that I was. And like, oddly enough, we separated at a time when I was probably at my sickest, and it ended up being really a turning point for me. I think maybe it just gave me the space and time to be able to like really reinvent myself. But that was really necessary, that complete reinvention. And maybe the couple of like 180s that I've taken in my life since that divorce, which I felt like my life was so steady. It was so like clear, and I was heading in such like a clear direction until the moment when I got divorced. And then like my life has gone like this a few times since then. And like, it's been a little nauseating, but it's really allowed me to like define for myself who I am.
Yes. I don't mean to laugh when you say it's been a little nauseating, but I can appreciate what you're saying. And just sometimes life doesn't take you quite in the direction that you see it going. And it can be a little bit frustrating or nauseating or sickening. And, but then it comes back, hopefully back into focus. Like it sounds like it has for you, and you've become a much stronger person through the experience. And as you said too, like a better human. That's one thing that I've thought about, is that it has made me a little bit better of a human. I was wondering if that had contributed to your divorce, if potentially the sickness had done that. And I can see on so many levels how that would, just again, partially that identity, like that's going to be something I'm going to grapple with for a little bit now, of just thinking about people being held in that space. And sometimes I think people choose to stay there too, right? I watch some people, and I don't know if it's evident to them, but looking at it from the outside, I'm like, I think that person kind of likes being sick, which is never really an easy pill for people to swallow or hear about. And I don't know if people have thought about that. I hope, listeners, for your sake, that you do listen and think about this point, and that, you know, we have so much power. We have the power in our body, and we have control over things. And, you know, think about it. Is it more convenient? Is your soul getting something more beneficial from being sick than not being sick? Are you being served in some way through your sickness? Like, are you having people wait on you, or are you being the center of attention, and maybe it's, again, not something that you've really thought about or taken the time to consider, but I think that's a huge component to this too, is just being able to identify really what that sickness is serving in your life, and what is it filling, or what are you seeking to fill by having it occur? And maybe by looking at it from that way, it gives you a little bit more insight to be able to shift enough to let go of it or to give enough space between you and sickness. And that's the other thing I think about too, is like, you're not your sickness. Sickness is something that is potentially just happening to you. But you've got to somehow figure out ways to give yourself space to separate self from sickness. And by going in nature and doing some of the work that you've done too, I think that allows, I feel like it's like a little bit of a wedge, and then that peels a little bit more open and becomes a little bit more open, and you can really step more fully into that space of pulling that out of yourself, to help it to move it off to the side.
Yeah.
So that was another thought too. And like, were there particular moments that you knew you were going to heal? Was there ever, when you say with your divorce, that was kind of a turning point for you, through your journey, that, maybe you can remember as being like partially a healing moment? Are there other times that come to your mind that you think of that you knew you're going to get better, or specific healing moments that occurred?
I would say it was a turning point, but only in hindsight. Like, I think a lot of these things, like, I didn't really notice until I was pretty far past them that I had made some type of turn. And there wasn't any like one thing I did or whatever. Like, I think it was just a lot of like momentum. And it was also like a lot of like the right people coming into my life to kind of like give me the perspective that I needed of. I remember there was this one guy that I did combo with. I don't know if you know what combo is. It's a Amazonian frog venom thing. Yeah. So there was this one practitioner I'd done combo with, and it's legal, so I feel comfortable talking about it.
As actually in the Lyme community, a lot of people have been supposedly using this to help them. So
yeah. And he was like, he came to my place one day for working on it, or maybe it was as he was leaving, and he was like, couldn't you just like pretend to get better and then get better or something like that? And at the time I was so mad at him, like to like tell me that I could like think my way out of this. And I don't think you can like think your way out of it, but I do think that you can kind of like magnetize your way out of it. But like, just like having people kind of come into my life that like said things that made me go like, what? Like, come on Earth. But then like really and more deeply considering things like, well, yeah. But I think just like watching the little changes, watching me gain foods back, watching me gain my strength back, like just seeing the little changes and like capturing those little wins really helped me to build the momentum to kind of get out of it.
Okay. And do you think, I know, I feel like you and I are probably pretty cerebral and we think a lot. Do you think it's possible to feel your way out of it, as opposed to thinking about it? I think that's more of the key of what people need to do. And I think a lot. I don't feel as much. And so we work on feeling well, feeling healthy, reminding body what it feels like to be healthy. But also too, I think sometimes people have gone so long in sickness that they don't really remember what it feels like to be healthy, to remind the body of what that feels like.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done with just remembering what overall health feels like in the first place.
Yes.
So,
yeah. I did have a period of time of doing like a bit of microdosing.
okay.
That was a thing that gave me good days. And like those good days gave me the feeling of feeling good when I hadn't had that pattern in so long. There were other things that did that for me too, like cryotherapy would like sometimes bring me back into the vibe of like feeling good. Sometimes it was something like combo. And I don't think it has to be like these extreme things. And I don't think we have to put our bodies through a lot of like arduous change. But yeah, like getting really into my feeling body was super important. I also got really into ecstatic dance at that time. And I think that was also a thing for me, like being in a big room full of people, just like everybody was in this vibe. And like, you can kind of like just pick it up because you're just in there and all the people are in that, like, feeling good and being in their body. And I feel like maybe even just being around that really helped me.
Yeah, cool. What was I thinking about with the combo? Did you find that helped you? Do you think, like, because my understanding of that is like it just makes you poop a lot and vomit a lot for like 10 minutes. And then, so do you find that was a beneficial practice? Was it worth it?
So here's the experience that I had, and I did it so many times. I like literally can't even count the spots at this point that are on my legs and shoulders. But I think it's going through something really tough, right? Where you're like, oh my God, am I even going to survive this? This is so literally awful. And then you get through it. And then you have this feeling of such peace. And it also kind of brings in this feeling of strength. And so I think like it was one of these practices that reinstilled my faith in my own strength and my own ability to like go through something. And in that case, it was elective. So I think there was an additional sort of component to being like, I can choose to do hard things and do it and make it through it and like feel really good afterwards. So I think just like building my own faith in myself again was really helpful from that perspective. I don't know whether it was anything to do with the medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I've not tried it, but I know quite a few people who have. And again, I know it in the Lyme community, a lot of people try it to see if it helps. So that's an interesting way to look
my
at it.
own advice would be like, go easy, because your body's already going through a lot. So like doing a whole ton of dots and a ton of medicine at one time is probably going to be hard on a sensitive body.
Okay. And probably not going to be the best idea. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't say it's not a good idea. I would just like make sure that you really advise your practitioner about like where you're at from a health perspective so that they can maybe do like a really easy session with you first, like with very little amount of medicine to just see how you react, see how you feel in the days following. If you feel better, maybe that's a sign to do it again and come back and maybe try a little bit more. If you feel awful and it takes you 3 weeks to recover or something, that's a sign maybe it's not your medicine, or maybe you need to do it really like sparingly.
Slowly. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I contemplated doing bee venom therapy at one point too. I don't know what you've heard about that, but like that was another one that kind of makes me think of combo a little bit.
Yeah, all right. I've known people to do that too, although I can't say that I've ever heard anyone tell me that it gives them instant diarrhea and vomiting, but
no.
But I think I would have a little bit of anxiety just waiting for the sting to come, but it makes good sense about it. And just even the power of bees in and of itself, like what was I watching just talking about like some healing places are in hives. And so the vibrations given off from all the buzzing from the bees all together collectively like that can be really healing for people's bodies. I'm kind of fascinated with bees lately. Actually, they've been something I've learned a lot about. And our other cousin, Andrew, has a bee hive that he keeps. And I dog sit for them. Sometimes they give me honey. So I have 2 things of their delicious honey. Nice. But it taught me about how they keep the pollen in their back legs. And I don't know if you watch bees at all and see them, but the ones that are out collecting the pollen are the older bees of the hive, and they're more disposable. So that's why they're out there. And the young ones are inside the hive, actually doing a lot more of the work. And
interesting.
Have a much better appreciation for them than being just annoying little bees. Now I'm like, oh, look, the bee's coming to say hi to me. So, but yeah, bee venom therapy I've not tried, but again, have heard some pretty good things about that. All right. So then I guess my last question for you, and maybe you've already answered this, but what would you say is the best thing that's happened to you as a result of having Lyme and tick-borne illness?
Oh, I think it's just taken me a lot deeper into myself. And really built in me a confidence in who I am, sort of like by a process of tearing me back down to like nothing and really giving me the opportunity to rebuild probably multiple times at this point, like
Yes.
myself from the ground up to where I'm like, taking a risk because it feels like the right thing to do isn't really that scary, because what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Like, I've already been through some pretty dark moments. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think Lyme's made me more brave.
Yes. Our grandmother would say to tell us to be brave. Did she say be wise, be brave? Oh, I should remember this. I'll have to send it to you. She had 4 things that she said before she died, and I'm sad that I can't remember it off the top of my head, but that was one, was to be brave. And so it's not easy, especially as an independent self. Sometimes I think, when you're on your own and figuring things out, it can be a little bit harder, maybe, to be brave because you don't have any buffers. You don't have anybody there to help you sometimes to do things. And it can be pretty overwhelming and scary when you're alone, trying to manage your way through. But you are very good proof that it is completely possible. And again, I just am humbled by you every day when I see you out there taking shots of majestic mountains and chopping your own wood and doing all this stuff. Like I said, you're just an amazing woman to watch. And I'm so grateful that we reconnected a little bit later here in life. And I love you. And I appreciate you so much for taking the time to share more about your story and your great insight, because you have a really beautiful way of looking at the world. And it's going to help so many people to hear this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne, for having me on and for doing this podcast. You are such a light.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I will look forward to seeing you soon. And you have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.